The first of the legendary trials began at dawn on the very next day, and thousands upon thousands of excited Sci-Fi citizens gathered in the great arena to watch the foolish human fail spectacularly and prove once and for all that his species was inferior. The Maze of Mirrors was an ancient and terrifying structure built by powerful psychic architects who had died many centuries ago, and it was specifically designed to reach deep into the mind of anyone who dared to enter and pull out their most terrible fears and most painful memories and use those dark things against them. Even the strongest and bravest Sci-Fi warriors had emerged from that cursed maze screaming and completely broken after spending only a few minutes trapped inside its twisting corridors. Some unlucky souls had never recovered their sanity at all and spent the rest of their lives babbling in padded rooms. Skelis stood in the luxurious royal viewing box high above the arena floor and watched as Marcus Chun approached the dark entrance of the maze with calm and measured steps. He wore simple practical clothes and carried absolutely nothing with him, and his face was peaceful and relaxed as if he were merely going for a pleasant morning walk through a garden rather than entering a nightmare designed to destroy minds. He will come running out screaming within 10 minutes at most, one of her advisors predicted with absolute confidence. Humans are known throughout the galaxy for having weak minds and fragile emotions that shatter easily. Under pressure, Marcus stepped through the dark archway and disappeared from sight into the maze, and the massive crowd settled in comfortably to wait for his inevitable screams of terror and madness to come echoing out. Minutes passed in silence, then an hour passed, and still there was nothing but quiet. 2 hours went by, and then 3 hours, and then 4 long hours crawled past, and the crowd grew increasingly restless and deeply confused because no living creature in recorded history had ever lasted this long inside the dreaded Maze of Mirrors. Finally, after 4 hours and 17 minutes of impossible silence, Marcus Chen walked calmly out of the exit archway on the far side of the arena. His eyes looked tired and weary, but they were still clear and focused, and his mind was obviously completely intact and undamaged. The entire arena fell into shocked silence as 10,000 Sci-Fi stared in disbelief at this impossible human who had somehow survived their greatest psychological weapon. Keyleth rushed down from the viewing box as fast as her legs could carry her and confronted Marcus directly on the arena floor. "How did you do that?" she demanded with confusion and anger mixing in her voice. "How did you possibly resist the nightmare projections and the fear visions? The maze should have completely destroyed your sanity within the first few minutes." Marcus looked at her with those strange calm eyes of his and gave a small tired shrug of his shoulders. "I grew up with severe anxiety," he said simply, as if this explained everything. "I have been fighting terrible battles inside my own mind every single day since I was 12 years old. Your maze showed me fears and horrors and nightmares, but I have been living with far worse things inside my own head for my entire life. Honestly, it was actually kind of peaceful in there compared to some of my really bad nights back home." Keleth did not know what to say in response to this strange confession. She had never once considered the possibility that a species could be so constantly tormented by their own brains that external horrors manufactured by ancient psychic technology would actually seem mild and manageable by comparison. The first trial was awarded to the human. The second trial was called the Endurance Walk, and it was considered by many to be the most physically brutal of all 5 challenges. Participants were required to march continuously through the scorching Kilrath Desert for 72 hours straight, without any rest or water or shade from the burning suns. The desert was hot enough to literally boil the blood of most known species, and the sand was sharp enough to cut through even the toughest boots within just a few hours of walking. The Sci-Fi people possessed a special biological ability that allowed them to enter a meditative walking trance during such ordeals. In this trance state, their bodies could continue, moving forward automatically while their conscious minds rested and recovered. It was the only way anyone could survive such a grueling test. Humans had absolutely no such ability, and the judges were completely certain that Marcus would collapse from exhaustion and dehydration within the first day of the march, but Marcus did not collapse for 68 brutal hours straight without stopping. Marcus Chen walked through that burning, hellish desert. His feet bled heavily through his completely ruined boots and left red footprints in the sand behind him. His lips cracked and bled from the terrible dryness. His eyes became glassy and unfocused with exhaustion and severe dehydration. The observers reported that near the end of the march, he was talking out loud to people who were not actually there, seeing vivid hallucinations of friends and family members calling out to him and encouraging him to keep moving forward, but he never stopped walking. Not once did he sit down or fall to his knees or give up when he finally crossed the finish line and collapsed into the waiting arms of the medical team. The Salvari observers were deeply disturbed by what they had witnessed. They had never in all their long history seen any creature push through such extreme suffering purely through stubborn willpower, an absolute refusal to quit. Why did you not simply give up when the pain became unbearable? One of the senior judges asked him later after he had recovered. Enough to speak. Giving up was never an option that existed for me. Marcus answered with a weak but genuine smile on his cracked lips. Humans simply do not know how to quit on things that matter. We never learned that skill. We just keep putting one foot in front of the other until we reach wherever we are trying to go, or until we die trying. The second trial was awarded to the human. The third trial was called the Calculation Sphere, and it was a complex strategic simulation that required players to manage thousands of different variables simultaneously, while making perfect decisions under intense time pressure. Salvari children typically mastered such puzzles easily by the age of 10, and the judges were absolutely confident that the human would fail miserably at this intellectual challenge. Technically speaking, Marcus did indeed fail this trial. His final score was far below the minimum passing threshold, and his strategic choices were frequently inefficient and sometimes seemed completely illogical by Salvari standards. But the way he failed was so creative and so unexpectedly innovative that the Grandmasters of Strategy formally requested a private meeting with him afterward to discuss his unusual approach. They spent many hours talking with him about his inefficient but absolutely fascinating methods of lateral thinking and problem solving. They admitted openly that while his solutions were technically wrong according to all Salvari mathematical models, they revealed entirely new ways of approaching problems that the Salvari had somehow never considered in 12,000 years of civilization. The third trial was officially awarded to the Salvari, but it was definitely not the crushing and humiliating intellectual victory that Calith had been hoping to witness. The fourth trial was simply called the Hunt, and it was considered by many to be the most dangerous of all 5 challenges. Participants were required to track down and successfully subdue a wild relics beast using absolutely no weapons of any kind. The relics was a massive and terrifying predator with razor-sharp claws that could cut through metal and thick armored skin that could stop most energy weapons. This creature had killed many experienced hunters over the centuries, and its ferocity was legendary throughout the Empire. Marcus tracked the deadly beast for 6 long hours through a dense and dark forest, and the judges watched his progress through floating camera drones, fully expecting at any moment to witness him being torn apart by the savage creature. What happened instead shocked absolutely everyone. Watching Marcus did not attempt to fight the relics at all. Instead, he carefully studied the creature and learned its behavior patterns, and discovered through patient observation that the beast responded positively to certain sounds and submissive body gestures. Over the course of several tense hours, he slowly and patiently gained the massive predator's trust by mimicking these signals and offering it food he had gathered when Marcus finally emerged from the forest at the end of the trial. He was calmly riding on the back of the Vrelix, as if it were a loyal and obedient pet rather than one of the deadliest creatures in the known galaxy. The judges searched frantically through their ancient rulebooks, looking for some technicality that would allow them to disqualify this unexpected result. But there was absolutely nothing written anywhere that said a hunter had to actually harm the creature in any way. The official goal of the trial was simply to subdue the beast, and Marcus had clearly subdued it through friendship and trust rather than through violence and dominance. The fourth trial was awarded to the human Telith, who was beginning to feel something cold and terrible growing in her stomach like a spreading poison. It was a feeling that was dangerously close to genuine fear. Only one trial remained, and she was now facing the very real and horrifying possibility of actually losing her own arrogant wager. The fifth and final trial was the Narration, and it was meant to be a test. The throne room of the Sci-Fi Empire stretched for nearly 1,000 meters, and every single centimeter of it was designed to make visitors feel small and weak and completely unimportant. In the presence of Galactic Royalty Princess Keleth, Verena stood beside her father's magnificent crystal throne and watched the human delegation walk through the massive golden doors with a feeling of pure disgust rising in her chest like bile. Humans, she thought to herself with contempt, had only discovered how to travel between stars 300 years ago, and that made them little more than newborn infants crawling on the floor of the galaxy. Her own people had ruled the known universe for 12,000 years, and they had been building vast empires and conquering star systems, when humanity was still living in dirty caves and hitting each other with rocks and sticks. The human ambassador was a tall man with dark hair and strangely calm eyes, and he walked with a quiet confidence that Keleth found almost offensive. His name was Commander Marcus Chun according to the briefing files, and he led a small group of diplomats who all wore simple gray uniforms that looked cheap and ugly compared to the flowing silk robes worn by everyone in the Selvari court. Emperor Varthol, the ancient and powerful father of Keleth, sat upon his crystal throne and looked down at the humans with an expression of polite boredom that he had perfected over many centuries. He was nearly 800 years old by human standards, and he had seen countless species come before him to beg for scraps. From his royal table, "You may speak," the emperor said, and his deep voice echoed through the vast chamber like thunder rolling across mountains. Marcus Chun stepped forward and bowed respectfully to the throne, though Keleth noticed with irritation that he did not bow as deeply as proper protocol demanded from inferior species. "Great Emperor," Marcus said in a clear and steady voice, "I come on behalf of the United Earth Coalition to propose a trade alliance between our two peoples. We believe that cooperation between humans and Selvari could benefit both of our civilizations in ways that neither of us can achieve alone." Keleth could not stop herself from laughing out loud at this ridiculous statement, and the sound of her mocking laughter rang through the throne room like crystal bells. Several other nobles quickly joined her laughter, and soon the whole court was chuckling at the pure absurdity of this primitive little creature. Thinking he could negotiate with the undisputed masters of the entire galaxy, Marcus Chun did not flinch at their mockery, and his calm expression did not change even slightly, and somehow that complete lack of reaction made Keleth even more annoyed than she already was. "You find something amusing, Princess?" he asked, and he looked directly at her with those strange, steady eyes. Keleth stepped down from the raised platform where she had been standing and walked toward the human ambassador until she stood close enough to see the odd round pupils of his alien eyes, and the tiny imperfections in his primitive mammalian skin, I find absolutely everything about you amusing," she said with a cold and cruel smile spreading across her beautiful face. "Your species has existed for merely the blink of an eye in galactic terms, and yet you come here asking for alliance as if you were somehow our equals. It would be exactly like an insect crawling up to a god and asking to become business partners." "Caliph," her father said from his throne in a warning tone that suggested she should remember her manners. But she ignored him completely because she was having too much fun humiliating this arrogant human. "Tell me, human," she continued with venom dripping from every word, "what could your primitive and backward people possibly offer us that we do not already possess in abundance?" Marcus Chen looked at her for a long and uncomfortable moment before he finally spoke his answer. "Perspective," he said simply. "Fresh ideas and new ways of thinking. A different approach to seeing the universe and solving its problems. Your empire is incredibly old, princess, and old things have a dangerous habit of becoming rigid and brittle and breaking when pressure is applied." The entire court gasped audibly at his boldness because no one had ever dared to speak to the crown princes in such a direct and challenging manner. Caliph felt her pale face flush with anger, and her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You dare to insult," she began with fury building in her voice. But Marcus cut her off before she could finish. "I dare because I must," he said without any trace of fear in his voice. "My people sent me across the galaxy to secure an alliance with your empire, and I absolutely will not fail them simply because your court is too proud and too arrogant to see any value in anything new or different." Emperor Varthel raised his hand slowly, and the room went completely silent immediately, because everyone knew better than to speak when the emperor demanded quiet. "This discussion grows tedious and wastes my valuable time," the emperor said with a dismissive wave. "Commander Chun, your proposal for alliance is formally rejected. Humanity is simply too young and far too weak to be considered worthy of alliance with the great Selvari Empire. Perhaps in another 1,000 years, when your species has matured, you may petition us again." Marcus Chun's jaw tightened visibly, but he nodded slowly in acceptance of the emperor's decision. "I understand your position," he said. "Then I will gather my delegation and take my leave." "Wait," Caliph said suddenly as a wonderfully cruel idea formed in her mind. She wanted to teach this arrogant human a lesson he would never forget for the rest of his short little life, and she wanted the entire galaxy to witness his complete and total humiliation. "Father, I have a proposal that might provide some entertainment," she said, and turned to face the emperor with excitement glittering in her violet eyes. "Let us give these humans a chance to prove their supposed worth through the ancient and honored tradition of the 5 trials." The entire court murmured with surprise and great interest at this suggestion. The 5 trials were legendary tests that had been used for thousands of years to judge the worthiness of those who sought favor from a Selvari throne. In all of recorded history, no alien species had ever managed to pass more than 2 of the 5 brutal challenges. The ancient trials? Her father asked with his eyebrows raised in mild surprise. You would waste such an honored tradition on these insignificant creatures? Think of it as entertainment for the court, Caliph said with a wicked and predatory smile. Here are the terms I propose. If the humans can somehow manage to win even a single trial out of 5, we will grant them their precious alliance. However, if they fail all 5 trials, as they certainly will, then humanity must formally accept vassal status under our glorious empire for the next 1,000 years. She turned back to Marcus Chun with triumph already shining in her eyes, and she expected to finally see fear breaking through his irritating calm. Exterior instead, she saw something unexpected in his expression. She saw genuine interest and perhaps even excitement. And what exactly are these famous trials? he asked with curiosity rather than terror. "They are tests of mind and body and spirit," Calith answered proudly. "The first is a psychic maze that breaks the sanity of those foolish enough to enter its corridors. The second is a brutal desert march lasting 3 full days without any rest or water. The third is a strategic puzzle that requires absolute genius to solve. The fourth is a deadly hunt against one of our most dangerous predator creatures. And finally, the fifth is an oration that tests the depth and value of one's culture and philosophical wisdom. I accept your challenge," Marcus said without even a moment of hesitation to consider the Danger's Caliph blinked in genuine surprise at his quick answer, but then her cruel smile grew even wider with anticipation. "Let me raise the stakes even higher to make this more interesting," she said. "I am so completely confident in your inevitable failure that I will add a personal wager to sweeten the deal. When you lose all 5 trials, as you certainly will, you will marry me and serve as my trophy husband for the rest of your pathetically short human lifespan. You will become a living symbol of human inferiority, paraded before the entire galaxy as permanent proof that your species is absolutely nothing compared to the Selvari." She fully expected him to refuse such humiliating terms or to show some sign of fear or to back down from such a degrading arrangement that would shame him forever. Instead, Marcus Chun smiled at her. It was a small and quiet smile, calm and knowing and filled with some secret confidence, and it sent an unexpected and uncomfortable chill running down Calith's spine like cold water. "I accept your terms completely," he said, "but allow me to add my own condition to balance the wager. If I somehow manage to win all 5 trials, then you will marry me instead, and you will do so as my complete equal, rather than as any kind of trophy. You will stand proudly beside me before the entire galaxy and formally acknowledge that humanity is worthy of respect and partnership." The court erupted in thunderous laughter once again, and even the ancient Emperor Vothel allowed himself a rare chuckle at the sheer absurdity of this human's ridiculous counteroffer. "You truly are the most entertaining creature I have met in centuries," Calith said through her own laughter. "Very well then, I happily agree to your foolish and impossible terms. Prepare yourself, Commander Marcus Chun, for the greatest humiliation your species has ever experienced in its brief history." She extended her slender hand in the wedding ceremony was without any doubt the most humiliating and painful experience of Calith's entire long life, and every single moment of it felt like burning poison flowing through her royal veins. She stood before the sacred altar in the magnificent grand temple of the ancestors, wearing the traditional white and gold ceremonial robes of a Selvari bride, and she looked at the human standing across from her and felt nothing but overwhelming shame and burning fury churning together. In her heart, like a violent storm, 10,000 nobles from across the empire had gathered to witness this historic moment, and Calith knew with painful certainty that every single one of them was thinking the exact same thing. The proud and arrogant princes had been brought humiliatingly low by a creature from a species that most Selvari considered barely more evolved than common livestock. She would carry this terrible disgrace like a heavy chain around her neck for the rest of her very long days. Marcus Chun wore formal human clothing for the ceremony, a simple black suit that looked plain and boring and almost offensively understated compared to the magnificent and elaborate Selvari ceremonial robes worn by everyone else in the temple. And yet, despite his simple attire, he stood with a quiet dignity and calm confidence that Calith found deeply and irrationally irritating. Ancient priest spoke the sacred words of eternal binding in a solemn voice that echoed through the temple's crystal halls, and Calith forced herself to repeat the traditional marriage vows through teeth that were clenched so tightly her jaw ached. When the lengthy ceremony was finally complete, She was officially and irrevocably married to a human. Being her father, the Emperor, watched the proceedings from his elevated throne with cold disapproval radiating from his ancient eyes like winter frost. He had not spoken a single private word to her since she lost the wager, and she knew deep in her heart that he blamed her entirely for embarrassing the royal family before the watching eyes of the entire galaxy. After the ceremony concluded, there was a great feast held in the palace's largest banquet hall, and Marcus sat beside Calith at the high table as was proper for her new husband. Every time he attempted to speak to her or make polite conversation, she deliberately turned her face away and refused to acknowledge his existence as if he were invisible. When the endless feast finally ended after many long hours, and they were escorted by palace guards to their new shared living quarters, Calith immediately walked straight into a separate bedroom and locked the heavy door firmly behind her. "I do not share living space with animals," she announced through the thick door in a voice dripping with contempt. "You will stay on your side of these quarters, and you will not speak to me unless it is absolutely necessary for official functions. Those are my rules, and you will obey them." She fully expected him to argue loudly or demand his legal rights as her husband under Sci-Fi law, or perhaps even try to break down the door in some primitive display of male aggression. Instead, Marcus simply said, "As you wish." Calith in a calm and unbothered voice, and she heard his footsteps walking away toward the other side of their shared quarters. The first several weeks of their strange marriage continued in this cold and hostile pattern without any change. Calith stubbornly refused to eat any meals with her husband. She refused to attend public events at his side as tradition demanded. She refused to acknowledge him as anything other than a shameful burden that she was unfortunately forced to carry because of her own foolish mistake. But Marcus did not complain about her treatment, and he did not fight back against her cruelty, and he did not try to force her to accept him or respect him in any way. Instead, he spent all of his time learning Calith's personal servants reported to her regularly about what her husband was doing, and they told her that the humans spent many hours each day studying the Sci-Fi language with intense dedication, practicing the difficult sounds and complex tones over and over until he could speak it almost as fluently as a native. He read thick ancient books about Sci-Fi history and culture. He asked endless questions about their customs and traditions and religious beliefs. He showed what appeared to be genuine interest in understanding everything about her people and their way of life. This quiet persistence annoyed Calith even more than if Marcus had been openly angry or demanding or confrontational. She simply did not know how to fight against someone who stubbornly refused to act like her enemy, no matter how badly she treated him. One morning, she found him sitting alone in the palace library, completely absorbed in reading an ancient historical text about the founding of the great Sci-Fi Empire thousands of years ago. "Why do you waste your valuable time with such things?" she demanded harshly as she approached him. "You will never truly be one of us, no matter how many dusty old books you read or how many words you memorize." Marcus looked up at her with those frustratingly calm eyes that she was really beginning to hate. "I am not trying to become Sci-Fi," he said patiently. "I am trying to understand my wife's people and their history so that I might become a better husband to her. Is that really so difficult to understand?" "I do not want you to be a good husband," Calith snapped back at him, with venom in her voice. "I want you to disappear completely and stop embarrassing me with your very existence. I know that is what you want," Marcus said, and there was no anger or resentment in his voice at all, only calm patience and perhaps a hint of sadness. "But I made a sacred vow on our wedding day, and humans take their vows very seriously. I will still be here whenever you are finally ready to see me as something other than an enemy. I am not going anywhere." Calith, he returned his attention to his reading and Caliph stormed away from the library feeling more frustrated and confused than ever. Before the breaking point in their Cold War came 3 months into the marriage at a grand state dinner celebrating the Emperor's 800th birthday. Prince Velen was Caliph's younger brother, and he had always been cruel and arrogant and petty even by royal standards. He had spent the entire evening loudly making jokes and cutting comments about the pet human that their foolish sister had been forced to marry. Finally, after drinking far too much ceremonial wine and losing whatever small amount of self-control he normally possessed, Velen stood up unsteadily and addressed Marcus directly in front of the entire assembled court. "Tell me something, human." Velen slurred with a vicious mocking smile twisting his handsome face. "Do you enjoy being a little dancing pet for our entertainment? Do you roll over and perform amusing tricks whenever my sister commands you to? Perhaps you should balk for us right now so we can all have a good laugh." The assembled nobles laughed nervously at the prince's cruel joke, and Caliph felt her face flush hot with embarrassment. Not for herself this time, as she might have expected, but surprisingly for Marcus, who sat quietly beside her enduring this vicious public humiliation without responding. She expected Marcus to bow his head meekly and accept the insult as his proper place. She expected him to show the weakness that all humans surely must possess hidden beneath their stubborn exterior when faced with true power. Instead, Marcus Chun rose slowly from his chair, and when he looked directly at Prince Velen, something fundamental changed in his human eyes. The calm patience that Caliph had grown so accustomed to seeing was still present in his gaze. But now it was joined by something else entirely, something much harder and far more dangerous, something that made Velen's drunken smile fade away like morning mist. "I have killed men for far less than what you just said to me," Marcus said, in a quiet voice that somehow carried clearly through the suddenly silent hall. "I will not kill you tonight, because your sister would mourn you despite your many flaws, and I genuinely do care about her happiness, even if she does not believe. Emmy, but do not ever mistake my patience for weakness again. Prince Velen, I am not your pet, and I am not your entertainment, and I am not something you can mock without consequence. I am a human being, and my people have survived horrors that would shatter your ancient empire into dust. Test me again, at your own great peril, and you will learn firsthand exactly why the galaxy should fear what we can become." The great hall was completely silent, and every single person present stared at the human with new eyes. Velen had gone deathly pale, and he sat down heavily without speaking another word. For the entire rest of that long evening, not a single person made any more jokes about the princess's human. Husband Keyleth watched her husband calmly return to his seat and continue eating his dinner, as if absolutely nothing unusual had happened, and she felt something strange shift inside her chest. Some wall cracking, some door opening, something she could not clearly identify, and definitely did not want to examine too closely that night for the first time since their wedding. Caliph did not lock her bedroom door. She found Marcus sitting alone on the wide balcony of their shared quarters, looking up at the countless stars that filled the night sky, and after a moment of hesitation, she walked out and sat down beside him. Without saying anything, they sat together and surprisingly comfortable. Silence for a long time before Caliph finally spoke. "Tell me about Earth," she said quietly. "Tell me about your people and where you come from. I want to understand." Marcus looked at her with genuine surprise in his eyes, and then he smiled warmly and he began to talk. 6 months into her unexpected marriage, Caliph discovered a terrible secret that would change absolutely everything she believed about her beloved father and her glorious empire. It began with a simple accident on an ordinary afternoon. She was searching through her father's private study looking for an ancient ceremonial document she needed for an upcoming religious festival, and while moving stacks of papers, she accidentally triggered a hidden compartment cleverly concealed within the Emperor's ornate desk inside that secret compartment were files marked with the highest possible security classification. Documents that were clearly never meant to be seen by anyone outside the Emperor's most trusted inner circle of advisor Skeelith. Knew she probably should have closed the compartment immediately and walked away and pretended she had never discovered anything at all. But something deep inside her made her reach for the first document, and once she started reading the horrible words printed there, she found she could not stop no matter how much she wanted. The files described something called Operation Clean Sweep, and it was a massive military plan that had apparently been in secret development for the past 50 years. The target of this operation was clearly stated on every page: the complete and total destruction of Earth and the annihilation of the human species. The plan called for a devastating surprise attack against humanity using the full combined power of the Selvari Imperial fleet. But the goal was not conquest or forced submission or even enslavement as might be expected. The explicitly stated objective was complete and utter extermination of every single human being in existence down to the very last child. The military strategists who had created this plan had carefully calculated the most efficient methods for destroying human cities and human ships and human colonies and human lives with cold mathematical precision. They had estimated exactly how many bombs would be needed and exactly where they should be dropped and exactly how long the complete genocide would take to accomplish. The projected casualty count was printed in cold, emotionless numbers at the bottom of one of the pages. 11 billion human beings would die. The official terminology used throughout the documents to describe this planned mass murder was pest control, as if humans were nothing more than insects infesting a garden that needed to be cleansed. Keely's hands trembled violently as she continued reading through page after page of horror. She learned the reasoning that her father and his advisors had used to justify this unthinkable crime. They had concluded that humanity was growing too fast and becoming too powerful too quickly, and they genuinely believed that within just a few more centuries, humans might actually be able to challenge Selvari dominance of the galaxy. Rather than face that possibility, the Emperor had decided that the safest course of action was simply to eliminate the threat before it could ever fully develop. The solution they had chosen was genocide, on a scale never before attempted in Galactic. Historicalith felt physically sick, and she had to sit down heavily in her father's chair to keep from falling. She had grown up her entire life believing with absolute certainty that the Selvari were the most civilized and enlightened and morally superior species in the entire universe. Now she was reading undeniable proof that her own government and her own father were actively planning the cold-blooded murder of billions of innocent people simply because they were afraid of what those people might someday become. She thought about Marcus and all the stories he had told her about Earth. She thought about the billions of humans living their ordinary lives and raising their children and dreaming of the future and falling in love and creating art and music. She imagined all of them screaming as they burned in Selvari weapons fire. She imagined entire cities turned to ash and entire oceans boiled away, and an entire species erased from existence as if they had never mattered at all. She absolutely could not allow this monstrous thing to happen, but what could she possibly do to stop it? Her father was the Emperor, and his word was absolute law throughout the Empire, and anyone who dared to speak against him publicly would be immediately arrested for treason and almost certainly executed. She was just one person, just one princess, and she was completely powerless against the might of the Imperial military. She needed help desperately, and there was only one person In the universe, she felt she could truly trust that night. She went to Marcus's room, and for the first time since their marriage began, she entered without knocking and sat down across from him with naked terror shining in her violet eyes. "What is wrong?" Marcus asked immediately, rising from his chair with obvious concern when he saw the expression on her pale face. "They're going to destroy your homeworld," Calla said, and her voice was barely louder than a whisper. "My people, my own father. I found the secret plans hidden in his study. They are going to kill everyone on Earth. Every single human being in existence. 11 billion people, Marcus. They are going to murder them all, and they call it pest control." She expected rage. She expected hatred. She expected him to look at her and finally see the enemy she had always been. She expected him to blame her for being the daughter of the monster who was planning to slaughter his entire species instead. Marcus sat down slowly and let out a long, heavy breath, and when he looked at her, there was no anger in his eyes at all. No, he said, quiet like Keyleth stared at him in complete shock. "You know? How could you possibly know? How long have you known about this?" "About 3 months, Marcus admitted calmly. "Human intelligence operatives discovered evidence of the plan shortly after our wedding. My government has been secretly preparing countermeasures and defensive strategies ever since." "Then why did you not tell me?" Keleth demanded with hurt confusion in her voice. "Why did you not warn me about what was happening? Why did you let me live in complete ignorance while my own father was plotting genocide against your people?" Marcus reached out slowly and took her trembling hands gently in his own warm, steady grip. "Because I needed to know whose side you were truly on," he said. "Keleth, you are the daughter of the Emperor. You were raised from birth to believe that humans are inferior creatures who deserve nothing better than to be ruled over or destroyed. I could not risk telling you about the plan until I was absolutely certain that you would not betray us to your father. And now?" Keleth asked. "Are you finally certain now about where my loyalty lies?" "You came here tonight to warn me," Marcus said, and his voice was warm with something that sounded like pride. "You did not have to do that. You could have said nothing and let the attack happen and kept your comfortable life as an imperial princess. Instead, you came to me in the middle of the night with fear in your eyes and truth on your lips." "Yes, Keleth, I am absolutely certain now about who you really are." Tears formed in Keleth's eyes and began to spill down her cheeks, and she was not sure if they were tears of relief or tears of shame, or perhaps both emotions mixed together. "I am so sorry," she said. "I am so deeply sorry for how I treated you, for how I mocked you, for how my people have treated your people, for everything. You have nothing to apologize for," Marcus said gently. "You were raised in a culture that taught you from childhood to look down on anyone different. The fact that you can see past that early conditioning and recognize the truth proves that you are stronger and better than your upbringing." He squeezed her hands and looked deep into her eyes with an intensity that made her heart beat faster in her chest. "Keleth, I never wanted a trophy wife. I never wanted a symbol of conquest or submission. I entered that wager in the throne room because I saw something special hiding inside you, something proud and fierce and capable of true greatness if only given the chance to emerge. I wanted an ally in this fight. I wanted a true partner. Are you willing to be that? Are you willing to stand beside me against your own father to prevent a monstrous genocide?" Keleth thought about her father sitting cold and calculating on his crystal throne, planning the deaths of billions with the same casual attitude he might use to plan a dinner party. She thought about 11 billion innocent humans who would die screaming if she did nothing. She thought about Marcus, patient and kind and far stronger than anyone she had ever known. And she thought about the future they might actually be able to build together if they could somehow survive what was coming. "Yes," she said, and her voice was steady and certain. "I am completely with you. Tell me everything. Tell me the entire plan." Marcus smiled at her, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen in her entire life. "Humanity is not nearly as helpless as the rest of the galaxy seems to believe," he said. "We have spent the last 300 years quietly preparing for exactly this kind of moment. We always knew that eventually one of the ancient elder species would decide to try to eliminate us before we became too powerful to stop. We have been making secret alliances with other species who share our values and our desire for a more just galaxy." He stood and walked to a hidden panel cleverly concealed in the wall and pressed his hand against it to reveal a sophisticated communication device that Caliph had never noticed before. The Crethony Confederacy believes in freedom and self-determination for all species. The Morvax Republic has been enemies of the Selvari for thousands of years and would welcome a chance to finally balance the scene. The massive Selvari invasion fleet dropped out of hyperspace near Earth, fully expecting to find a helpless primitive world waiting to be cleansed and destroyed. Instead, they found something that made even the most battle-hardened admirals freeze in complete disbelief. Thousands of hidden defense platforms suddenly activated across the entire solar system. Advanced weapon systems that humanity had been secretly building and hiding for decades in preparation for exactly this moment. The platforms immediately locked onto the Selvari warships with targeting systems that were far more sophisticated than anyone had expected, and they waited in deadly silence for the order to open fire, and the human defenses were far from alone. From behind Earth's pale moon emerged the sleek and deadly warships of the Crethony Confederacy, vessels crewed by fierce warriors who valued freedom above all else and who had made a secret alliance with humanity more than 50 years ago. From the distant asteroid belt came the massive armored dreadnoughts of the Morvax Republic, ancient and bitter enemies of the Selvari Empire who had waited patiently for centuries for exactly this moment of revenge and justice. And from the cold darkness between the stars appeared ships that no living being had ever seen before, vessels of strange and impossible design that seemed to bend light around themselves. These ships belonged to the mysterious beings known only as the Architects, ancient watchers who had observed the galaxy in silence for millions of years. Now at last they had finally chosen to reveal themselves and stand openly with humanity against the Selvari threat. Admiral Verkith, the supreme commander of the Selvari invasion fleet, stared at the tactical display before him and felt ice forming in his stomach and spreading through his veins. This mission was supposed to be nothing more than a simple extermination operation, an easy task of burning a backward primitive world that could not possibly resist. Instead, he was facing what appeared to be the single largest coalition fleet ever assembled in all of recorded galactic history. "Admiral," his communications officer said in a voice that trembled with confusion and fear, "we are receiving a transmission on all military frequencies simultaneously. It appears to be originating from somewhere aboard our own flagship, which should be completely impossible. Put the transmission through," Verkith ordered with growing dread. The main view screen flickered to life, and every single Selvari across the entire invasion fleet saw the exact same image appearing before them. Princess Caliph Verena, Crown Princess of the Empire and heir to the Crystal Throne, standing tall and proud on what appeared to be the bridge of the flagship itself. She wore formal Selvari military attire, and her expression was calm and absolutely determined. Standing beside her was Commander Marcus Chun, her human husband, now wearing the crisp uniform of a senior Earth Coalition officer. "This is your Crown Princess speaking to all ships in the fleet," Caliph announced, and her clear voice carried across thousands of vessels and reached millions of ears. I formally invoke the ancient right of challenge against Emperor Varthol for his crimes against the Galactic Accords and against basic decency. Our Emperor has ordered the complete genocide of an innocent species, and this is a crime so monstrous that it absolutely cannot be allowed to stand. The transmission was reaching not just the military fleet, but every ship and station and outpost throughout Sci-Fi space. Billions of ordinary citizens across the Empire watched their beloved princes speak out boldly against their emperor. I have spent the past 3 months building alliances within our own military and among the noble houses of our empire. Caliph continued with growing passion. I know that many of you have privately expressed horror and disgust at Operation Clean Sweep. I know that many of you have told me in secret conversations that this planned genocide is not what the Sci-Fi Empire should stand for. Now is the time to stop hiding your true feelings and make your choice public. Any military personnel who continue to follow my father's illegal orders from this moment forward will be considered traitors to everything our civilization claims to believe. She paused and looked directly into the camera with fierce violet eyes. I know this is incredibly difficult. I know I am asking you to turn against your sworn emperor and risk everything you have. But I am also asking you to be true to yourselves and to the ideals we claim to hold sacred. We are supposed to be better than this. We are supposed to be a civilization of wisdom and justice and honor, not a civilization of genocidal murderers and cowards who destroy entire species simply because we are afraid of them. Prove that we can still be what we claim to be. Stand down your weapons and let this moment be the beginning of a new and better era instead of the end of everything we might become. The fleet went completely silent as thousands of ship commanders wrestled privately with the impossible choice that had been placed before them. For long tense minutes, no one moved and no one spoke, and the fate of billions hung in the balance. Then slowly, one ship at a time, vessels began to power down their weapon systems and pull away from the attack formation. At first, it was just a handful of ships, the specific commanders that Caliph had personally recruited and convinced over the past months. But soon the defections began to spread like wildfire through the fleet as officers, who had been privately horrified by Operation Clean Sweep finally found the courage to act on their conscience. Within a single hour, more than half of the entire Sci-Fi invasion fleet had abandoned the genocide mission and formally declared their loyalty to Princess Caliph and her new vision for the Empire. The remaining loyalist ships found themselves badly outnumbered and completely surrounded by both the defecting Sci-Fi vessels and the massive coalition fleet that humanity had assembled. After a brief consultation among the loyalist commanders, they made the only sensible decision and surrendered without firing a single shot. Admiral Burkith was among the very last to lower his weapons, and when he finally gave the order to stand down, he sent a private, encrypted message to Caliph on the flagship. Your father will never forgive you for this betrayal, the message said. You have made yourself his enemy forever, and he will hunt you until one of you is dead. I know that very well. Caliph replied calmly. But some enemies are worth making, and some prices are worth paying. The battle that was supposed to result in humanity's complete extinction ended without a single human casualty. Emperor Varthol was arrested 3 days later by his own palace guard. Soldiers who had once sworn to die for him, but who could no longer stomach serving a leader who had ordered the murder of billions of innocent people. He was brought in chains before the Galactic Council to face formal charges of attempted genocide and crimes against sentient life. His trial lasted 6 weeks and featured testimony from hundreds of witnesses, including military officers who had helped plan Operation Clean Sweep and diplomats who had tried to warn him against this course of action. In the end, he was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to permanent exile on a frozen prison moon at the very edge of known space where he would live out the rest of his long life in isolation and disgrace. Akilith visited her father once before his transport departed for exile. The emperor looked old and broken and small, nothing at all like the powerful and terrifying figure she had feared and admired her entire life. He sat in his cell wearing simple gray prisoner clothes, and when he looked at his daughter, his eyes were filled with confusion and bitter hatred. "Why?" he demanded. "Why did you betray your own blood and your own people for a species of worthless primitives? You have destroyed everything our family built over 12,000 years." Keleth looked at the man who had raised her and who had once been the center of her entire universe, and she felt a strange mixture of pity and disgust and lingering love all tangled together. "Because they are not worthless primitives," she said firmly. "They are survivors and dreamers and builders. They are stubborn and foolish and beautiful in ways that we have somehow forgotten how to be. And they absolutely deserved a chance to prove what they could become without being murdered in their cradles by people who were simply too afraid to let them grow." She turned to leave the cell, then paused at the door for one final moment. "I loved you, Father," she said quietly. "I wish more than anything that you had been worthy of that love." She walked away from the prison, and she never looked back. 1 month later, Kalith stood before the full Selvari Senate in the Great Hall where laws had been made for thousands of years, and she formally requested that her marriage to Commander Marcus Chen be officially recognized not as a symbol of human defeat and inferiority, but as the foundation of a new alliance between their two peoples. "I badly underestimated humanity," she admitted openly to the assembled senators. "I looked at them and saw only children and insects and prey waiting to be devoured. I was completely and utterly wrong about everything. They are survivors who have faced horrors that would shatter most species and somehow emerged stronger. They are dreamers who absolutely refuse to accept any limitation placed upon them. They are relentless in their stubborn pursuit of something better than what they currently have." She turned to look at Marcus, who stood beside her with that calm, patient smile she had once hated more than anything and now loved more than she had ever loved anything in her entire existence.